Comptia Security Plus makes for a great foundational or first cybersecurity certification for two reasons, really. So number one, it's widely reported to be a great cert to help you land that all-important first cybersecurity role. And second, it's going to help you build a broad base of vendor-agnostic cybersecurity knowledge. And this video marks the launch of my Security Plus Exam Cram series. Now, there's no prize for longest prep time, so I'm going to show you the fastest, least expensive way to prep to pass Security Plus on your first try. I'll show you not only which materials to use, but how to use them more effectively using 5 proven techniques as part of a strategy I've leveraged with tens of thousands of students. And we'll step through the syllabus together, talking about how to best approach each domain so you know exactly where to focus in your studies. And it's a little known fact that Security Plus goes a long way toward prepping for another very popular cybersecurity cert that many approach a little later in their career. Stick around to the end of the video and I'll tell you which one. And in this first video of my Comptia Security Plus Exam Cram series, we're really going to be focused on getting your strategy aligned so you can prepare for this exam quickly, effectively, inexpensively. We're going to lean on the official Security Plus Exam Study Guide and Practice Test Bundle from CISSP, which includes 1,000 flashcards, 1,000 practice questions, 2 practice exams, really everything you're going to need to prepare effectively, all for less than $60 US. I have a link to the option with the best price in the video description out on Amazon.com. And as with virtually all of my learning videos, you'll find a PDF copy of the presentation linked in the video description. And the Security Plus exam consists of 5 objectives or knowledge domains. I'll have one video for each of those exam domains, really designed to deliver what you need without the fluff. I like to say my series is great to be the first hour and the last hour you spend preparing for this exam, because it's not the only thing you're going to use, but it's an important part. And it will help you prepare faster when used with my study techniques, which we will touch on in just a moment, as well as any online or expensive boot camp will help you prepare. In fact, I'm going to explain in a minute why expensive boot camps are actually not worth the money. And the official study guide is the only cost in my system, and as I mentioned, it doesn't cost much. It's less than $60 for that study bundle, which includes online access to those practice exam questions. So it's really fantastic in that respect. And you'll see the 5 core lessons in the Security Plus Exam Cram series, 1 for each domain, published here on the Inside Cloud and Security YouTube channel in November and December 2021. As I mentioned, there is no award for the longest study time. I'm going to take you through the official syllabus, the exam notes, and my exam preparation strategy to really get you dialed in for fast, effective preparation here. So about the exam, you're encouraged to use the documentation from Comptia, links in the video description that will take you through exactly what I have here. So they expect that you can assess the security posture of an enterprise environment and recommend and implement appropriate security solutions. So they mention enterprise environment. That means large organization, and to be able to recommend and implement appropriate solutions. So this isn't really about just memorizing basic concepts. You need to understand how to apply them. Monitoring and securing hybrid environments. So hybrid environments tells us that hybrid cloud comes into play here. So cloud computing is going to factor. Operating with an awareness of laws and policies, as well as principles of governance, risk, and compliance. So if risk assessment has never been something you've worked with, if regulatory compliance is new to you, if you've not had a look at laws like GDPR or regulations implemented by industry such as PCI DSS, this is an area we're going to need to spend some time. Identify, analyze, and respond to security events and incidents. Certainly security incident response is a discipline where you can make a lot of money. This exam does not expect that you will become an incident response expert, but you are going to learn many of the concepts, the related tools that will give you that first step in really understanding the principles around incident response. Now, all of this is equivalent to 2 years of hands-on experience working in a sysadmin type job role. And the disclaimer you'll see here with this exam, that's true of really any exam, these examples should not be construed as a complete listing of all the content of the exam. Now, we're going to step through all 5 domains of the exam so I can really help you dial into what you need to focus on for each of those. But just know that just because it's not mentioned explicitly in the syllabus doesn't mean you can't have a question sneak in on the exam. Now, just some details on the test. So the current version of the exam ends in 601. You won't be finding the old version for scheduling. 90 questions, multiple choice and performance-based. So what the heck does performance-based mean? Well, that may require you to perform a task or solve a problem within a simulated IT environment to demonstrate specific knowledge or skills. This is a vendor agnostic exam, so don't expect something very deep and vendor specific in those performance-based questions. Now, again, recommended experience, at least 2 years of work experience in a sysadmin role with a focus on security. If you don't have that, it doesn't mean you shouldn't tackle this exam. It means you are going to spend time preparing hands-on, and you're going to take your time preparing for this exam. They do expect that you have broad knowledge of security concepts. There's quite a range of knowledge, as you're going to see, covered on this exam, which is precisely why it's such a great first exam that folks appreciate when they are hiring candidates. Passing score is 750 on a scale of 100 to 900, and all the questions are graded, so if you skip one, it's wrong. So I mentioned 5 domains. Let's just step through the exam objectives, those 5 knowledge domains. Domain 1 is attack, threats, and vulnerabilities. Domain 2 is architecture and design. Domain 3 is implementation. Domain 4, operations and incident response. And Domain 5, governance, risk, and compliance. The weighting there tells you approximately what percentage of the questions will come at you from each domain. And you see implementation there being the heaviest, and attacks, threats, and vulnerabilities being very close behind it. We'll break these down so you know exactly what you're in for over the next few minutes. And as I mentioned, the expectation here is hands-on knowledge, so Comptia also provides a proposed hardware and software list. So you notice here they mention laptop with internet access. That's because there are things you can't do with a VM in terms of ethical hacking with regards to your wired and wireless networking. So you'll notice there they require quite a bit of hardware if you can put your hands on it. I mentioned that if you're not familiar with Linux at all, that you might want to change that. Kali Linux is really the OS of choice for ethical hacking, and it comes with a wide range of security tools preloaded, including Wireshark, incidentally. And they mention access to a CISSP. That's a cloud platform, essentially. So Microsoft Azure, Amazon AWS, essentially. So if you can get a trial subscription, if nothing else, that's a good idea. Okay, now I'm going to share with you 5 learning techniques that really do work. If you go look at the hundreds of testimonials on the exam cram videos on my channel around CISSP, around Azure Fundamentals, the AZ900 exam, you will find folks that have leveraged my video content and these techniques very effectively. My objectives here are really to help improve your long-term recall, increase your comprehension, your understanding of concepts. And we know with Security Plus, we need to, more than memorize, we need to understand how to apply concepts. And to reduce your study time. Again, no prize out there for longest study time. I don't want you to rush your exam prep, but there are only so many hours in the day, so why waste time? So technique number 1 is called a mnemonic device, also known as a memory device. This is a technique that makes memorizing information easier. We use this often when we're trying to memorize processes or frameworks. A common technique is an expression mnemonic, what we call an acronym, a first letter mnemonic. And when we make these memory devices simple, relevant, and visual, they're going to be more effective. Let me give you some examples here. So let's start with a first letter mnemonic, also known as an acronym. So the OSI model, a fundamental model for networking that's been around for many decades. You may see it come up on the Security Plus exam. We can do 3, please do not throw sausage pizza away. We can memorize it in the other direction. All people seem to need data processing. These are the 2 I used back in the 90s to learn the OSI model. I mentioned that relevant makes a mnemonic better. So we could take the sausage pizza option away and maybe replace that with please do not toss security processes aside. Whatever works for you. But it gives you a way to memorize those 7 layers in order should it slip your mind. I mentioned visual is also useful. So let's take this incident management framework, which includes detection, response, mitigation, reporting, recovery, remediation, and lessons learned. So if I take those first letters, it looks like drum roll. So now I've tied a visual element to this, right? Because the first letter mnemonic is DRM RRRL. Another great addition there by making the mnemonic visual. Chunking. I really like chunking as a way to break information into smaller pieces that make sense so we can memorize them more quickly. So take cryptography. This is one that's a really big area on the CISSP exam. You're going to see it in a shortened, more abbreviated form on this exam. And we have asymmetric cryptography, symmetric, hashes, block ciphers. So we could chunk this by maybe tackling just hashes, for example. So let's take hashes and break this into chunks based on unique properties. So hashes is just one category. I could break this into 4 chunks, but I can also break each of these chunks into smaller pieces. So I can chunk the chunks, so to speak. So let's jump into hash algorithms. And I've got a long mind-numbing list here, right? So I can break this into the MD family, the message digest, and right away I notice here that they all have the same hash value length. I also notice that none of them are still in common use due to their weaknesses. So I can break those into chunks and memorize that pretty quickly, right? So what MD 2, 4, and 5 have in common is they all have a 128-bit hash value and none of them are still in common use. I can tackle the SHA family. What I see right away here with secure hash algorithm is that the name includes the hash value length, and then I can see that most of these are still in use, right? So I see that value length ties into the name. I see most are still in use, everything from the SHA 224 and up, right? All right, so this one is really important, the power of repetition. So really understanding how many times do we need to repeat our study of a concept to remember the concept. So there are a couple of things that we need to tackle here to understand that. So the first is a concept called spaced repetition. So when we repeat our study of a topic, after we go through that first session, there is a time period whereby our recall drops. That's called the forgetting curve. And then we go and we study a second time, and we still have a forgetting curve. We're still not going to remember everything over time. But what you'll see is that over time, our forgetting curve gets longer, and our recall is better. The forgetting curve is shallower each time. That's spaced repetition, well proven learning technique. Now, spaced repetition can help us with both long-term and short-term retention. So if I want to memorize something quickly, I can repeat for a first time right after learning, then I can space it out 15 to 20 minutes, and then 6 to 8 hours, and then 48 hours. And if I want to memorize for a long time, I need to come back a little further out, right after a day, 2 to 3 weeks, 2 to 3 months. So memorizing quickly there, you see that I can memorize something for the short term, and that's what quickly means here, is committing this to short-term memory. I like to pop a 6th repetition on my short term of 1 week to try to kind of bridge the gap between short term and long term, because short term will help you get through an exam. Long term is how we commit something to memory, a concept to memory, so it moves with us through our working life and it becomes a long-term asset to us. So we want to commit for the long term. This right here tells you why a 5-day, $3,000 boot camp is rarely a good idea, because to commit something to memory for the long term, I have to come back weeks later, right? Those 5-day, $3,000 boot camps typically want you to cram everything in 5 days and then go take the exam on the end of the 5th day or the 6th day to get it under your belt. That's really doing you a disservice. Number one, to your pocketbook, but number two, to your utility of that information over the long term. So that's my 2 cents. All right, now I want to introduce you to my 80-20 strategy, and this is how we can identify the weakest 20% areas of the content, the areas that you know least well in the Security Plus content, and spend 80% of your time on that. Now, the 80-20 for you might be 70-30, it might be 60-40, depending on your experience, but this is going to help you. So what I like to do is to suggest a learner start with the practice exams. Take one of the exams and go through one of the practice exams, and in the scoring, look at where your weak areas are. Write that down, and that's where you want to spend some time with some targeted reading. I don't suggest to anybody to read the study guide end to end, because you're not going to commit all that to memory just reading end to end. That's not effective. We want to use multiple sources and multiple techniques to commit this to memory, right? So we want targeted reading of the weak areas. Review the PowerPoints that come with my video series. Watch live videos. Watch these videos where I'm taking you through PowerPoint. The live quiz or flashcards. If you have a partner at home or a friend who can quiz you on concepts, I love that. If you don't have a study partner, use the flashcards that come with the official study guide. It's very effective in that respect. But the magic here is multiple sources of content and multiple formats. So the reading, practice exam, flashcards, PowerPoint, the plethora of free YouTube video content out here. It's really a myth that we are visual learners or auditory learners or tactile learners. The science proves that we are a combination of all of those things. So there's quite a lot of free video content out here on YouTube. My series will be rolling out with 1 video per domain over the 4th quarter, so here in November, December of 2021. Professor Messer has 20 hours of free content out here on YouTube. Mine's going to be a little more focused, again, trying to drill down in an abbreviated, really succinct format. And it's been well proven through studies that understanding concepts before you try to memorize them greatly improves your retention. And Security Plus expects that you know these concepts well, that you can apply them, you can implement and recommend, so understanding before memorization is great. And if you have a memorization tip that worked well for you that you'd like to share, I'd love to hear about it. Just put it in the comments below the video. Now, Comptia also details a very long list of acronyms you're expected to be familiar with, so I would take a pass through these and just highlight anything that's new to you, so you can make sure you're familiar with the totality before you walk in on exam day. So let's get into line-by-line review of the syllabus. I promise this won't take long, but it will be useful in dialing in your exam focus. So we'll start with Domain 1, which is threats, attacks, and vulnerabilities. So I want to start showing you how to pick apart the syllabus to get your focus settled right away. So we'll look at 1.1, which is compare and contrast social engineering techniques. So right away I notice that whaling is down here separate from all of the other types of phishing attacks. So I'm going to lump that up there together, and I'm going to use the chunking technique, right? I'm going to learn those together. I noticed that principles, reasons for the effectiveness of social engineering techniques is over here, and you'll notice that I bolded the top level bullet there because that is a group of content that is all related that you need to group together in your study. Now pay attention to the verbs in each section. So what does compare and contrast mean? Well, it means you really need to focus on the unique characteristics of each item in the list so you know what makes a whaling attack different from a spearfishing attack and different from a run-of-the-mill fishing attack. So 1.2, given a scenario, analyze potential indicators to determine the type of attack. And we see what are essentially classes of attacks for purposes of our discussion. I see malware, I see password attacks, I see physical attacks. You see that I've highlighted that top level bullet from the syllabus to kind of clue you in here that you have a group of related items that you need to tackle as a unit, as a chunk, right? 1.3, analyze potential indicators associated with application attacks. So now we're talking about attacks, but application attacks got their own subdomain in 1.3. That means it's going to get some specific focus on the exam. Likewise with 1.4, we see network attacks, the same as we saw in 1.2 and 1.3, but now network attacks, and calling out wireless, layer 2, DNS, malicious code. So those are the chunks you need to focus on in your study. Explain different threat actors, vectors, and intelligence sources. So we see threats, threat actors, vectors. This is a long one actually, but explain means really be able to describe this in 25 words or less. Someone once said that if you can't describe a concept simply, you probably don't understand, and I think being able to provide a 25-word explanation as easily as you can provide a 250 or 1,000-word explanation really demonstrates a level of mastery of the content. And you see, just continuing on 1.5, threat intelligence sources, research sources. So that's a big subdomain there. That feels like an exam all in and of itself. All right, 1.6, explain security concerns associated with various types of vulnerabilities. Notice you see cloud-based versus on-premises. You see third-party, you see patch management, you see legacy. So again, that broad base of knowledge, you're going to be expected to know about hybrid cloud here, right? Both cloud computing and on-premises computing, and then the two together. So if you don't have experience on one end of that spectrum, you're going to want to spend some time drilling in there. Summarize the techniques used in security assessments. So security assessments is really some hands-on activity. This is one of those specializations that pays really well down the road, and this is going to be your introduction to it. So we see threat hunting, we see vulnerability scans, and we see SIM and SOAR. So a security information event management system is often accompanied by security orchestration, automation, and response capability. So what we have on the left here are activities that you'll carry out as a security analyst. SIM and SOAR I really see, generally speaking, as the tools that are going to consume data and automate response to threats. And then last up in domain 1 is explain the techniques used in penetration testing. So under the penetration testing, reconnaissance, and exercise types, you see really conceptual topics here. So understanding the difference between red, blue, white, and purple teams. Under pen testing over at the left here, rules of engagement, what lateral movement, persistence, cleanup, etc. But explain is the verb here, so you just really need to be able to describe some concepts. I don't see this particular item being a big hands-on topic. So let's dive into domain 2, which is architecture and design, two areas you wouldn't think of as being part of a first cybersecurity certification, but this is going to give you a leg up on concepts for later in your career and really to help you, set your own trajectory perhaps a little more aggressively. So let's start with 2.1, which is explain the importance of security concepts in an enterprise environment. Now, if you're not familiar with what an enterprise environment is, that generally means a large and usually complex environment. And with that in mind, we see here topics like configuration management, data protection, site resiliency, so understanding the difference between hot, cold, and warm site. So again, concepts here, right? So that's right there in the title. This isn't going to be hands-on. This is going to be diving into some concepts, which we will touch on in the Domain 2 lesson later in the year. So 2.2, summarize virtualization and cloud computing concepts. I do expect cloud computing to feature prominently on this exam, and precisely for the fact that certification exams, to be relevant, tackle the relevant, current, latest, and greatest topics, and cloud computing is everywhere now, so we can expect a fair bit of focus in that respect. So cloud models, understanding IaaS, PaaS, software as a service, XaaS. Also the shared responsibility model, which shows up in another one of the exam domains. On-premises versus off-premises, that means we're going to need to have some understanding of hybrid cloud, private cloud, public cloud, mentioned over here under cloud models. And serverless architecture, which is another cloud concept. Infrastructure as code is a really big topic, but you're going to notice here that it's scoped pretty narrowly in 2.2 down to software-defined networking and visibility, so a very small piece of infrastructure as code. But summarize means explain, and back to what we talked about earlier, being able to explain succinctly, briefly, as evidence that you really understand the concept well. 2.3 is summarize secure application development, deployment, and automation. So development really jumps out at me here. And one thing that really caught my eye here was I see continuous integration and delivery showing up over here. So continuous integration and delivery is CI/CD, a concept associated generally with DevOps. This is a security exam, so DevSecOps really as an evolution of DevOps. So here we're really stepping a bit into the developer world and trying to understand security in the context of the software development lifecycle. Right, 2.4, summarizing authentication and authorization design concepts. So again, we're touching on concepts as they relate to architecture and design. And if we think about architecture and design, generally speaking, that is not the implementing, that is not the doing, right? That is understanding the concepts and where those technologies fit in a security design. So we see authentication methods here. So we see here everything from directory services, which would bring to mind immediately Active Directory. We see federation, which comes to mind in some of our cloud platforms and their identity providers, although we do see federation in the Active Directory world. So quite a lot we have to talk about there in the Domain 2 lesson. And then biometrics. So I want you to notice here that biometrics goes pretty deep, it seems. So we see fingerprint, retina, iris, facial, voice, vein, gait analysis, which is stride, and then you'll notice down there false acceptance and false rejection. So we'll need to dig into those. That's we're going to look at type 1 and type 2 failures there, and what the crossover error rate means, which actually relates to those false acceptance and rejection concepts. And then multi-factor authentication, which we I think all know by now is kind of the industry standard. We need not only multi-factor authentication, but we need a strong second factor of authentication. So we'll break down MFA. Okay, 2.5. Given a scenario, implement cybersecurity resilience. So think high availability in this case. In fact, if we look at the CIA triad, which is a foundational concept in cybersecurity, the A in CIA is availability. So implement here means choose the right option for a scenario. This doesn't mean go implement in a hands-on way. So we're talking about architecture and design. You need to know where these concepts fit in the grand scheme based on requirements, right? So under redundancy there, we see everything from geographic dispersal, so think geo redundancy, all the way down to disk, as well as network, and power. Replication, so virtual machine, we think of VM replication, storage area network replication. I wouldn't be surprised to see database replication pop up in here. It's not called out here specifically, but remember, Comptia themselves say, do not take this syllabus as being 100% comprehensive. They may throw you a curve. And on-premises and cloud coming up again. So Continuing with 2.5, a big subdomain here. You see backup type, so you're going to need to know the difference between incremental and differential, for example. You see non-persistence, and the A, again, in the CIA triad is availability. So that's really what resilience speaks to here in this case. 2.6, explain the security implications of embedded and specialized systems. So if you're not familiar with embedded systems, we'll talk about that in a second. So you see here that for embedded systems, Raspberry Pi, a field programmable gate array comes up. IoT, so Internet of Things, is something we're all familiar with, right? SCADA is something I'm familiar with from a past life, but an embedded system is a computer system that has a dedicated function within a larger mechanical or electronic system. For example, a voice over IP phone it has an embedded system. You'll have a chip in there with an operating system. In the manufacturing world, it's not uncommon that we see large machinery with multiple embedded systems within there, each with distinct functions that support the larger whole. And just continuing down that road, we see two things here I want to call out as areas that I think you definitely need to focus as current, common relevant topics. So communication considerations. If you're not familiar with something like Zigbee, for example, if narrowband, if 5G doesn't come out here, we're going to need to break those down. And one thing that comes up all the time with embedded systems are the constraints of embedded systems, because oftentimes an embedded system is out in the field, out at the edge, for example, where we have challenges with power, with network connectivity, with the range of the device in connecting to the network so we can get data back to the central hub, which may be in the cloud, for example, where we're storing and potentially processing data. So we're going to have a good conversation about that in the Domain 2 lesson. So 2.7, explain the importance of physical security controls. This is an area where I find virtually everybody, regardless of their past experience in cybersecurity, needs to spend some time studying, because there are very few people in the world who have been responsible for designing physical security controls. Remember, this is an architecture and design domain, so we're talking about physical security controls in the context of architecture and design. Explain the importance, called out in the subdomain title, means you need to know not only what that particular item deals with, but why it is important, and really, just as importantly, where it fits in your broader strategy. So we see everything here from barricades to fire suppression to locks to personnel, so people-based physical security, cameras and motion detection, and even fencing. So a lot to unpack in this domain. And continuing on here, sensors, secure areas, so an air gap network is something that comes up quite frequently in conversation. And 2.8, summarizing the basics of cryptographic concepts. So we're talking about cryptography here, everything from digital signatures. I noticed that the official study guide when it comes to quantum and post-quantum that you see down here in the lower left, the book was very light on this. It had maybe 2 paragraphs, and don't worry, I've got you covered here. I have a video that will break down quantum and post-quantum so you know exactly what will be important for the exam on those 2 areas. But I see a lot of topics here touching on cryptographic algorithm areas. So symmetric versus asymmetric cryptography, for example, elliptic curve, hashing, key length. So we're going to take these all together in the context of talking about cryptographic algorithms. And blockchain kind of stood out to me here as something we don't typically see come up in cryptography discussions, but we will tackle that. But also the common use cases, symmetric and asymmetric algorithms work together to solve for these. I have a nice nugget I'm going to share with you in the Domain 2 lesson that will explain to you in less than 3 minutes how symmetric and asymmetric algorithms work together to solve for these common use cases. Very important. So let's shift gears and dive into domain 3, which is implementation. So we can already guess that this is one of those domains where we're going to be in for some hands-on expectations. So given a scenario, implement secure protocols. You're going to see implement, it really means choose the right protocol for a use case, and you notice the use cases are called out there on the right. So that's how I would interpret that. I do expect you're going to need to know something about the workings of these protocols, but I believe the most telling aspect of 3.1 is the use cases are called out on the right. So we need to understand where these protocols factor in the cybersecurity world. And in the Domain 3 session, we'll match these protocols and their functions to their common use cases, because some of these are going to factor together. When I think of Active Directory, for example, I think of Kerberos, I think of DNS, I think of LDAP, or LDAP over SSL. So some of these will together factor to serve for different functions within a common use case, like directory services. 3.2, given a scenario, implement host or application security controls. You see here we're talking about endpoint protection. Think antivirus, think intrusion detection and prevention, whether that be network-based or host-based. Database security, hardening in an environment, and you notice here that it calls out open ports and services, which could be applied to an operating system, to a network device. We see encryption, patch management, application security. That's a big topic. So we can think about, for example, putting a certificate onto a website to secure communication on that website. So a fair bit to unpack here in the Domain 3 lesson. 3.3, given a scenario, implement secure network designs. So we're in the implementation domain, and they're calling out implementing secure network designs. And again, this comes down to understanding which tool we match to the task. So for load balancing, types of load balancing, and you notice here active-active, active-passive, we could see that get into even more detail, because we can certainly load balance based on IP and port. We can load balance based on session. So that could get more detailed than you see here in the syllabus. Network segmentation, VPN. So always on VPN, one of those fairly new concepts in the context of the VPN topic. So we'll want to unpack VPN. Now notice here in 3.3, implementing secure network designs, we see under network appliances a long list of appliances, but I want you to notice that the last top level bullet for network appliances is firewalls. Look at the range of firewalls they're going to touch on here. Web app firewall, NGFW, which is a next generation firewall, one that would ingest threat intelligence amongst other things. So a lot to unpack here in terms of being familiar with the unique characteristics of each of these different types of firewalls. 3.4, given a scenario, install and configure wireless security settings. So you see a lot of detail here that most of us are going to be unfamiliar with, but we see wireless security come up in multiple subdomains throughout this syllabus, so wireless is going to factor. I have some chunking techniques that are going to make these easier for you to digest and remember for the exam, because we do have to drill down into what makes each of these unique and really understand where they fit. Given a scenario, implement secure mobile solutions is our 3.5 domain, and what jumps out to me here is that middle column, mobile device management, managing the device itself or managing the application, geofencing and location, implementing screen locks. There's really a thin line between managing business data and the business applications on a device, on a bring your own device scenario, versus fully managing a corporate device. So we'll talk about that division. And just continuing down the 3.5 rabbit hole here, enforcement and monitoring of really device state, like disallowing devices that have been rooted or jailbroken, side loading applications, meaning going around the official app store. So a few security concepts here to really dig down into when it comes to mobile device management. So when I see enforcement and monitoring of those concepts, that's something that I throw right into the mobile device management bucket, because that's really where we tend to address these in the real world. And you'll notice over here, deployment models describes the types of devices we're dealing with. So in a BYOD scenario, a bring your own device scenario, we're going to be a little more restricted in our capabilities versus a corporately owned device. 3.6, apply cybersecurity solutions to the cloud. Again, when we think about virtualization, as you've known it from years past, and cloud, I expect cloud is going to really be featured front and center throughout this exam. So I see here cloud security controls. So we'll need to talk about these in the context of the big cloud providers out there, the big cloud service providers, not just Amazon, not just Microsoft, not just Google, but conceptually, how do these concepts apply across all those? And then you see under solutions, we see CISSP, a cloud access security broker, which we'd use for shutting down shadow IT. I see next generation secure web gateway. I see firewall considerations in the cloud. So we have everything here. Really tells us we're talking about securing a cloud at a storage, network, and even application level. So this subdomain really gives us a lot to unpack. 3.7, implement identity and account management controls. So I'm thinking about identity and access management here. I see identity providers, I see account types, and when we get into the cloud, the concept of a service account gets more interesting. There are some account types we'll need to unpack in the cloud to be sure. And then account policies, thinking about password complexity and history and reuse. And we see some concepts that we saw earlier popping up here again, geolocation and geofencing, but again, it's a matter of context. So more to think about there. And 3.8, given a scenario, implement authentication and authorization solution. So this is really securing our identity. So we see authentication management, we see authentication and authorization, so auth-in and auth-z we'd call it, and access control schemes. When I see access control schemes, that we're really going to get into some academic type content there, but that's one where we'll need to chunk those and really break down what makes each of those different. I have some memory tips and a nice table to break those down in a way that I think will help you absorb those quickly. All right, 3.9, given a scenario, implement public key infrastructure. So this is really certificate services. Think the system that issues the TLS certificates that you're going to use to secure websites and services and applications. So the public key infrastructure, what I'm looking at in the left column there, those are really the roles within my public key infrastructure. The certificate authority is the server issuing the certificates, and intermediate CA is one level up from that issuing authority. So we'll need to break down really PKI architecture to fully unpack that. Types of certificates. Now here's another one where we're really going to get into some detail. So the difference between the utility of a wildcard certificate versus a subject alternative name certificate, what's also known as a SAN. So a SAN, a subject alternative name cert, is capable of multi-domain support, where we typically use a wildcard cert for a specific domain. And then the certificate formats, if you look over here on the right, the syllabus is a little vague here. So it tells us personal information exchange. So a PFX file is a file that contains the public and private key of a certificate, where a .cer file will contain the public key but not the private key. And P12 and P7b are other formats related to certificates. So on a given system, we could export a certificate key or key pair in a number of formats. And we'll need to break down why each of those are important. PFX is the one that jumps right out as a format where the cert contains the private key. So you can already see there's a lot to unpack, even at an architecture and design level in the implementation domain. And then look at the concepts down here on the right. So online versus offline CAs. When we think about our root CAs, there's a story to be told here. Certificate stapling and pinning. This is really getting down into the guts of implementation. These are advanced concepts, even though this is a great introductory security exam, right? All right, let's unpack Domain 4. And Domain 4 is Operations and Incident Response. So incident response is one of those areas where, if you demonstrate some expertise over time, it's an area where there's a lot of money to be made, and security operations is actually where I think most of you will begin your career as, maybe even a junior analyst. So I think this is where hands-on is really going to need to happen for you in preparing for the exam. And right here with 4.1, hands-on comes just front and center. So given a scenario, use the appropriate tool to assess organizational security. This is an entire page of tools you would use to assess organizational security. So hands-on learning is going to be very helpful here. I expect that having that laptop with a good wireless card and deploying Kali Linux is going to be very helpful in your learning curve. 4.2, summarize the importance of policies, processes, and procedures. So these are the written elements of cybersecurity that guide our actions in our operational life. So we see incident response plans, we see exercises here, tabletop walkthrough simulation. I see these exercises come up when we're thinking about business continuity and disaster recovery. And lo and behold, look over here to the right. I see disaster recovery and business continuity right there further on in the list. So these concepts are all going to be interrelated for sure. But incident response is one of those areas that if you really get into this and master incident response, it's a great specialization. Everybody needs that sort of capability. All right, 4.3. Given an incident, utilize appropriate data sources to support an investigation. We see here vulnerability scan outputs. We, in most environments I work in, we're scanning for vulnerabilities every month. SIEM dashboards, that's Security Information and Event Management. We're going to unpack what a SIEM is in a couple of different domains of this exam. And log files are important for your audit trail. So you see log files called out here. So there may be questions about managing audit trail. Over there on the right, we see metadata, we see net flow. So thinking about network traffic and investigations. All right, 4.4, given an incident, apply mitigation techniques or controls to secure an environment. So we see here reconfiguring endpoint security solutions, configuration changes related to our endpoints, our firewalls, mobile device management, DLP, which is really data protection, so data loss prevention. And then SOAR, which is automation, really. So SOAR is security, orchestration, automation, and response. And I see people write articles, describing, what's the difference between SIEM, security information event management, and SOAR? Well, they're two distinctly different functions, but I generally find that the two work together. So you'll have a SIEM that aggregates data from a variety of sources and processes that data to identify significant security events and perhaps raise incidents. And then SOAR is how we respond to security events and incidents with runbooks or playbooks. So that can be a written procedure, but it can also be an automated response, in some sort of script or automation technology. 4.5, explaining the key aspects of digital forensics. So this is a great entry-level security exam, right? So this isn't going to make you an expert in digital forensics, but it is going to really give you some knowledge around the process. So understanding handling of evidence related to an investigation, acquiring that evidence, and how we behave in an investigation in on-premises versus cloud environments. And you'll notice up there right to audit clauses. So your cloud providers, those platforms will have specific rules around forensics and how that audit process proceeds. They have some guidance for you, though, really. All right, so that was a short domain. We're going to dig into domain 5, which is governance, risk, and compliance. So like architecture and design, GRC is not a topic that one would associate with the early portion of your cybersecurity life, but understanding governance, risk, and compliance early in your career is going to give you a leg up over everyone around you who doesn't have their arms around this. So right away I see control types mentioned. So knowing the security controls that fall into each category is also very useful. When I think about physical security that we talked about a couple of domains ago, I think about the different types of control. And when I'm designing physical security, I want to combine preventative controls that prevent someone from taking an action, or a deterrent control that will discourage them from taking an action. For example, a fence can be a deterrent control, and a fence at a certain level of strength is really a preventative control, depending on how I implement. But we're going to learn these in the context of GRC, and I'll take these back to physical security as an example, as a place where we'll talk about some of those and apply some examples. All right, and 5.2 is explain the importance of the applicable regulations, frameworks, benchmarks that impact organizational security posture. So this is where we're going to touch on GDPR, which is an EU data protection regulation, and then we see PCI DSS, which is not even a law. That's a standard put together by the credit card companies out there, and is generally enforced by them in the contracts they have with vendors. So a lot for us to unpack here, but it's going to be all really reading or discussing and learning where these apply. And this is especially in the frameworks category here. It's going to be a great place for some of those first letter memory devices that I was talking about, as you try to remember some of the key frameworks out here and where they apply. But we see CISSP, we see NIST, we see ISO. So they all have their place. You know, we see NIST more in the government world, and some of these more in the commercial world. But don't be fooled. You know, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, even though those definitely apply to the government, they also apply to regulated industries like banking. So I spend a fair bit of time with cybersecurity in the banking world, and NIST, which is commonly thought of as a government framework, applies very much to us in the banking world because we are a regulated industry. So these are all going to be very important. And if you work in an enterprise environment, which many of you will, in a large, complex environment, these these frameworks are going to be very important guides. These standards are going to outline your obligations in terms of protecting sensitive data. All right, 5.3, the importance of policies to organizational security. So you see personnel policies there. So really understanding what types of behavior that these policies can prevent. For example, if I want to prevent collusion, I can use job rotation. If I want to make it very unlikely that an individual employee commits fraudulent acts, I can implement separation of duty. So I can require that a process needs input from two separate people, so they would have to collude with one another in order to commit that fraud. So each of these has its use. Now I want you to notice that phishing campaigns is called out here as well. And we were talking about phishing all the way back in the first domain. So phishing simulations as a way to improve our users' awareness of what phishing looks like, and therefore reducing our organization's exposure to or risk of falling victim to phishing. And one thing to bear in mind is within phishing emails, we will often find ransomware. And so phishing and ransomware go hand in hand as two very big risks to organizations. Third-party risk management, supply chain risk comes to mind right away. We're going to have a chat about that because that is everywhere, especially post-pandemic. I hear about vendor risk management and supply chain every week. 5.4, summarize risk management processes and concepts. This is another specialized area that not many folks in the world are all that knowledgeable about. So risk management strategy. So we'll talk about the different approaches to risk in our Domain 5 lesson. Analyzing risk. So we can analyze risk qualitatively, subjectively really, and then quantitatively. So applying formulas and really math to risk to help us prioritize our actions. So we will talk about risk analysis both in terms of qualitative and quantitative, and many of these functions you see up here above that, inherent risk, residual risk, control risk, etc. As we talk about qualitative and quantitative, many of these topics are going to come up. So we're going to chunk that and talk about them in the context of risk analysis, probably with a little more focus on quantitative risk analysis, because that is generally what we see as the accepted preference in the business world. And then we see here business impact analysis, and the two main acronyms I see come up there is our recovery time objective and recovery point objective. So how quickly can we recover, and how much data are we going to lose in the process? Always come to right to the top of mind. 5.5, explain privacy and sensitive data concepts in relation to security. So I see here data types come up, so data classifications, for example, which will include things like personally identifiable information or protected health information, PHI. And then roles and responsibilities, so understanding the difference between a data owner and a data custodian, as an example. So we'll break that down, and the information lifecycle is called out here. I'll show you a couple of different information lifecycles. There's more than one out there, but we'll kind of position the information lifecycle and the roles of these responsibilities, these role holders in that information lifecycle. Understanding that the last stage of the information lifecycle is usually destruction, so a whole discussion to unpack there. All right, I promised you I would let you know about that other exam for which Security Plus is going to give you a big leg up for, and this is really a leadership exam. Last I checked, it was the most popular exam for security leaders in the world. And in the United Kingdom even, it's considered the equivalent of a master's degree. That's legit. And that is the CISSP exam. There is a considerable difference in that a leadership exam. You're really coming at that from the mindset of a manager. In fact, when we're preparing for the CISSP, and I do have a whole CISSP exam cram series that's been used by many thousands of students, completely free on YouTube. We often say in the CISSP prep process, think like a manager. We're much more thinking as an analyst in the Security Plus exam. But that CISSP exam, much like the Security Plus exam, runs on a 3-year life cycle, generally speaking, and CISSP was updated in 2021. There's also an official study guide there that you'll want to have a look at. And that's our walkthrough study techniques and the Security Plus exam syllabus. Lesson 1 covering Domain 1 will be coming out very soon, in the next few days in fact, and the entire series in the course of November and December 2021. Thanks for joining me. I hope to see you next time, and until then, take care and stay safe.